Even though you didn't see any blood, you knew that something horrific had occurred.
They had made some sort of agreement that we're going to kill Laura.
The limb bones were taken off. The head was severed. There were just pieces of bone.
Where the body parts were found, that is certainly the most gruesome scene you could imagine.
Part of it is this deep-rooted desire to erase a person from existence.
We're very surprised that we did not find any DNA.
You really do this work to speak for those who can't speak for themselves.
A shocking murder becomes a dark mystery. The victim's body holds the key to convicting the killer. Every fiber is a clue. Every wound is a piece of the puzzle. In these cases, it's up to the medical examiner to find the crucial evidence and catch the murderer. This is Secrets of the Morgue.
I open the box and I find numerous vials. There were just pieces of bone. There was ribs, there were vertebrae. I have actually never received a case with so many vials before. So it was very, very difficult, hence I think that's why they brought it to me.
Dr. Ann Ross is facing the shattered remains of a horrible crime and one of the biggest mysteries of her career.
What drives us to do this kind of work is that these are huge puzzles. The bones tell you the life history of the person. They can tell us all of the things that occurred to you throughout your life, and we can tell you what happened in the death. Bone analysis is my area of specialization. If you took this from me, I don't know what I would do. There would be no reason for me to get up in the mornings.
The remains, found in a creek, have traveled over 1,000 miles back to Dr. Ross's examination table.
We were told that it was a victim that had died in Raleigh, had been transported to Texas, and since the crime occurred in Raleigh, the remains were returned for the investigation.
The bones belong to 27-year-old Laura Ackerman of Kinston, North Carolina. The question detectives Jerry Falk and Brian Hall need to answer is who would want to hurt Laura, and how did her remains end up so far away?
When we have a potential homicide investigation, the goal of the police department is to learn as much as we can about that particular person. When we talked to Laura's friends, they described her as a very bubbly person, no enemies to speak of.
She started this business with her friend and had an apartment in Kinston, and was just a wonderful person, according to everybody that knew her.
A mother of two, Laura's life is focused on her children.
The main thing about her was that she loved her kids, you know, and she was all about her two boys, and her life kind of revolved around that.
All she wanted was to live with her boys and have a good life with them.
Laura's best friend is a woman by the name of Yvonne Mathis.
Yvonne was a friend of hers and a business partner. She initially reported her missing.
There was a gap in continual phone contact that they regularly kept with each other. Yvonne grew increasingly concerned.
Laura wasn't answering her calls, and it was odd that Laura had disappeared at that point. And so she notified Kinston police.
Along with the investigators, Dr. Ross is trying to piece together the truth of what happened to Laura with only a few scattered bones.
Law enforcement deal with the crime scene aspect, whereas I actually deal with the remains of the case. The limb bones were taken off, the head was severed, the arms were severed as well. But by the time that we received them, they were devoid of all soft tissue. There's a sense of sadness, because once you've seen pictures of her and what she looked like in life and pictures of her with her children, and compare that to what you receive, it helps motivate me. You really do this work to speak for those who can't speak for themselves.
Dr. Ross's task is made more complex by the people who first handled the remains.
The medical examiner in Texas had sectioned the pieces where they saw trauma, but didn't let us know where on the bones they had made their cuts. So one of the things that we had to do that was almost impossible was to assess which was the trauma that was conducted at the time of death and what was the trauma that was conducted by the ME's office in Texas.
How Laura's body ended up dismembered is a mystery that detectives have spent weeks trying to unravel.
Generally speaking, people are not killed by strangers. They're killed by somebody they know. And people generally have a relationship of some kind to their assailant. There are occasions where we have what's called a stranger-on-stranger murder, but that is the rarity. That's not the norm.
The detective's first stop is a man that Laura's been seeing.
Mike was somebody that we definitely talked to, and he actually contacted us initially because he heard that Laura was missing. I remember him, offering, hey, do you mind if I create some flyers, some missing person flyers and distribute them?
Guilty parties will often stay close to investigators who are working the beat. They like to keep tabs on the investigation, and they find a thrill in the fact that they're able to get away with it. So this is often an indication that a person is guilty.
Detectives look deeper into Mike's relationship with Laura.
She actually worked for Mike. And from what he said, they went out on a couple dates, 3 or 4 dates. He was a person of interest in that sense. He had a computer that he had communicated with her on, and we took a look at that. He would have liked to continue dating her, but she said, no, I can't date anybody right now. I'm in the middle of this custody case, and I don't want to do anything to jeopardize that.
Ultimately, Mike is cleared, but the custody case is a promising lead, one that points investigators towards her ex, Grant Hayes.
He was this well-known, kind of charismatic type personality, the life of the party sort of person.
Grant Hayes played at area bars, and a lot of people knew him as a great musician.
In 2009, Grant and Laura were living in the U.S. Virgin Islands for his music career and wound up getting married. Laura was under the impression that the two of them were married. They went to the courthouse and went through the whole ceremony, but Grant never actually signed the marriage license, so the marriage was null and void. So they were actually never married.
The couple has 2 children together.
But while they were living in the Virgin Islands, Grant met Amanda.
Amanda is a 39-year-old aspiring actress.
Grant and Laura, they were still dating. They were definitely still in a relationship when Grant and Amanda met. But Laura actually wound up coming back to Raleigh. One of the children had some medical problems, and she came back to kind of take care of that. I think at the time that Grant and Laura, that they wanted to go their separate ways.
With Laura and the children back in North Carolina, Grant and Amanda are free to make their relationship legitimate.
Grant and Amanda wound up getting married in Las Vegas.
And they also had a child together.
The couple moves back to Raleigh, North Carolina. Grant wants to be closer to the sons he shares with his ex, Laura.
What we found out was they had a court-ordered child custody arrangement where they would meet on Fridays and exchange the kids. There was a lot of bitterness between the two of them, between Grant and Laura. It was just a very strained relationship, during the time of this custody case.
Any kind of custody battles involving children, it puts an enormous amount of stress on both parties. And this is the type of situation where the temperature of the family dynamic rises dramatically.
Message sent Wednesday, July 13th at 4:19 p.m.
Investigators discover a voicemail Laura left for a friend on the day she went missing.
I'll be here in about an hour. I'm going to go visit with my boys. Don't know what's going to happen as far as I'm concerned. So I'll give you a call when I'm done. And I just wanted to let you know, too, I don't know if I'll be able to see you before 7. But I want to find out if you're going to be available after that at any point. So that's later.
The voicemail raises questions for police.
It was very unusual for Laura to go have a custody exchange with Grant at his house. It was usually done at a Sheetz gas station.
So called him and asked, hey, do you know where Laura is? When's the last time you saw her? Grant says she came over that night. She got to the apartment about 6:30. She was there just a short time. She picked up the two boys and they leave for a few hours. She comes back to the apartment about 9:30, drops the boys off, and then she's gone, before 10 o'clock.
Detectives press Grant for details about Laura's late-night visit.
The phone sounded like it was cutting in and out, and Grant said, I don't have good phone service right now. I'm out in the boonies, which we thought that was odd because Grant lived in Raleigh. I didn't think they had any boonies in Raleigh.
Suspicious, investigators questioned Grant's stepdaughter.
We first spoke to Shay Elmer, which is Amanda's adult daughter. We say, we want to talk to you. Do you know Laura Ackerman? Yes. Laura's missing, and I think the wheels were turning in her head as well. And, Shay, of course, was very concerned. What's going on? I just found out my mom's in Texas. We asked, Shay, why did they go to Texas for? And she called her mom, and Shay's like, I had no idea you're going to Texas.
The revelation explains the dodgy phone connection, but doesn't explain why Grant and his new wife left town right after his ex went missing.
That threw up a red flag to us, like, why are they in Texas?
For investigators, it seems as though Laura Ackerman has simply vanished. But everything changes when they hear her ex-husband and his new wife, Amanda, may have driven to Texas right after she disappeared.
We were able to get phone records back immediately, and we saw a couple interesting things.
We learned early on when we looked at Grant Hayes' cell phone records that his phone was traveling from Raleigh, North Carolina, and was traveling across Mississippi and seemingly was heading to Texas.
Karen Berry, Amanda's sister, resided in Fort Bend County, almost exactly where his cell phone pinged.
Detectives head to Texas to interview Karen Berry.
She says, I know why you're here. And she says, but can I please pray first? Which for a detective, that's a good sign, because she's going to talk to Jesus, then she's going to talk to us, right?
She started discussing how Grant and Amanda had come down there, how it was an impromptu visit. It was hard for her because Amanda was her sister, but at the same time, she wanted to do the right thing.
Investigators learned Grant and Amanda behaved strangely while in town.
He was asking about a hog pen that was nearby and what that would be used for.
Her property, it's out kind of in the country, about an hour from Houston. And she has hogs and chickens and that sort of thing. And she said, I saw Grant was over there one day doing something in the hog pen. So we go over and there's this area in the soil that's a different color than the rest of the soil around it. It's darker, like something had been poured there.
Detectives take a sample of the soil and send it for testing.
We analyzed that and were able to determine that there were traces of muriatic acid in that soil.
Muriatic acid is a highly corrosive chemical. It will destroy tissue and destroy evidence. If someone were to use muriatic acid as part of a crime, what they're essentially trying to do is disfigure the body.
Investigators believe Grant and Amanda are trying to cover up a crime.
In a case like this, investigators know that they have to find hard evidence, that they can't just rely on their intuition or a hunch.
County Sheriff's Office in Texas has an investigator whose job it is to investigate environmental crime. And it just so happened that, you know, on July 20th, he's going down to the dead end of Skinner Road to check this location that's a hot spot for illegal dumping. He checks the camera that law enforcement had set up to try to catch people illegally dumping. And he sees a lady by herself dumping this muriatic acid. Then he goes over in the woods where the camera shows her dumping it, and it's still there. The investigator says, hey, y'all might want to come down here and we'll go down there and look at what he has. Immediately you can tell it's Amanda Hayes. And she's driving Karen Berry's son's truck.
It is suspicious behavior for a couple who claim not to know anything about Laura's disappearance. Detectives turn to Dr. Ross in an attempt to link the acid directly to Laura's remains.
I think Grant had the idea that he would put acid on the body and the body would disappear, and that's obviously not what happens. His effort to dump acid on the body is straight out of Breaking Bad, and so that's the only thing I could think is that the guy had watched a lot of TV and thought that that was a way to dispose of a body.
They wanted me to look at the teeth on the skull because some of the reports had been that they had used some type of acid to hinder her identification. There was a discoloration on the teeth, but there's no way to tell if it was the acid.
It's a setback for investigators. Without a clear connection, there is no way to link the acid burns in Texas to Laura's remains.
Just because you don't find something, it doesn't mean it wasn't utilized. It's just that on the remains available, there was no way to conclusively assess whether that was the case or not.
What investigators have learned is that whatever happened to Laura, Grant wasn't working alone.
Leading up to that point, we did not know the extent of Amanda's involvement. Certainly was a big confirmation that she had a role in this.
She was by herself. Grant wasn't there, so it wasn't one of those things where she could say, you know, well, he forced me to do something. No, you were doing things, you know, by your own free will.
Detectives finally get the break they've been looking for.
Karen Berry, Amanda's sister, gave some information that led them to the creek across the street. Grant and Amanda had gone out in a John boat late at night with a bunch of coolers that they had taken from North Carolina in a trailer. And prior to that, Grant and Amanda had been asking questions about whether there were alligators in this creek. Investigators were led to that creek. Members of the Fort Bend County Sheriff's Office got a boat to go out and look in that creek to see if they could locate Laura. I think the water temperature was incredibly high. The air temperature was over 90 degrees. And they discovered parts of her body in that creek essentially melting in the hot Texas sun.
They would see this fatty substance floating on the water, and then they would kind of swim over that area, and that's what they did each time.
It was the worst nightmare for everybody involved in this case.
And we only had 60% of the body, you know.
With authorities able to place Grant and Amanda near where Laura's remains are discovered, they believe the couple must have been involved in her murder.
Investigators need to gather real proof. They need forensic evidence, they need eyewitness accounts, they need stuff that will hold up in a court of law.
Up until that point, we really had no cause of death, or we didn't know what it was. I mean, we knew that, nobody's going to survive being dismembered, of course. But we had no physical evidence where we could say, hey, this is how Laura died. We had no proof. I just envisioned them, they were going to get away with this.
Investigators believe Grant and Amanda Hayes are involved in Laura's murder. They turn back to Dr. Ross to find physical evidence they need to connect the pair to the brutal crime.
Bodies are dismembered for various reasons. One is for transportation, to get the remains out of the crime scene to another place. The second one would be to hinder identification. And the third one is you just hate that person so much, it's like an overkill kind of situation. The first thing we need to do is tool mark comparison. Most recently, tool mark analysis on bone has been delegated to the forensic anthropologist because we are bone experts.
The different tools that I've seen used to dismember a body include a hatchet, an axe, a saw, and a butcher's knife. Some individuals may make a conscious decision to use something that doesn't require a lot of physical labor. So it may be an electrical tool, it may be something that's powered by gas. However, they may choose to experience the dismembering by using a lot of physical force and venting anger in that manner.
If Dr. Ross can identify the specific tool used to dismember Laura's body, then investigators may be able to link it to Grant and Amanda.
Any type of tool mark is best assessed on the cortical part, which is the hard bone. Unfortunately, most of what was brought to the laboratory had more of the spongy bone than the hard bone.
The bone isn't ideal for the test, but with so few remains, Dr. Ross doesn't have many options.
We examine the remains across sections of the cuts, and that will give you the striations of a saw. You can determine teeth per inch, which is the count of the teeth that are found on a saw, and also the persistence marks, the cuts that haven't been completed. And there were a minimum number of cuts. So that indicated to me that it was most likely a handsaw that had done the remains.
There's a lot of psychological research that says that it's not just an effort to hide a body or get rid of a body, but part of it is this deep-rooted desire to erase a person from existence. On a human level, it's just devastating to know that this young woman who had 2 children, her body had been cut up. It's very horrifying to hear facts like that.
This particular case certainly will task your mental and physical capabilities, but you have to keep working in order to solve the case.
Armed with the information from Dr. Ross, detectives search the Hayes apartment, looking for the tool used to dismember the body.
The apartment wasn't messy, but it was obviously very much lived in with children, Looking through the apartment, the thing that catches our attention is the bathroom. You turn the light on and it's, everything's shining. Everything is just spick and span.
We noticed that the shower curtain was missing in the master bathroom. It was also missing a toilet mat, a toilet brush. Everything a normal person would have in their master bathroom was absent. There was a distinct smell of a cleaning solution. and it was very prevalent as soon as you walked into that bathroom.
And there's this bleach stain on the carpet right near the little entry area.
So at that point, we felt that the crime scene most likely occurred in that apartment, but specifically the dismemberment most likely occurred in the bathroom itself. It's not something that you can have leave your mind. Even though you didn't see any blood, you knew that something horrific had occurred in that bathroom. We have special tools to be able to illuminate a bathroom to see if there is a source of biological material.
We took out the plumbing, we took up the shoe molding, we took up the flooring. We swabbed and luminoled every inch. We tore that bathroom upside down. We didn't find any physical evidence, biological-wise, you know, any blood or large DNA or anything like that. I felt like we were going to find something in that bathroom, you know, and we didn't.
For investigators, it's a nightmare to be this close to solving a horrifying murder, but missing that key piece of the puzzle.
It's devastating because in all these murder cases, you feel like you start to know the person. I mean, with Laura, I read through all her emails, I read through her countless voice recordings, talked to all her friends. I became a prosecutor because I wanted to work to try to help my community be safe and at the same time seek justice.
Just when it seems justice may never be served, Dr. Ross gets a call from investigators in Texas. They found one of Laura's legs, and it's intact.
They found her femur, Laura Ackerson's femur. It was a major break in the case. The remains that we had received in the past, they were so fragmentary that it was more difficult. If you look at your arm bones or your leg bones, the whole shaft is composed of compact bone. The femur is the longest bone in the body, and Texas sent it directly, and we were extremely excited.
The new bone could potentially lead Dr. Ross to the cause of death and help solve this tragic murder.
I think one of the greatest things that sticks with me with this case is how humans will go so far and lose their humanity in order to advance their own agendas to the detriment of their own children. It's important, it's imperative to compartmentalize that, regardless of your personal feelings or opinions. It's really important to not let those drive your work. The evidence is what actually needs to be presented at trial.
Determined to get justice for Laura Ackerson, investigators search her ex-husband's condo for a second time.
There was a ton of stuff in the apartment, but buried kind of amongst some papers.
They find a piece of paper that's signed by Laura Ackerson. It's a sort of custody agreement where Laura agrees to give up her children for a sum of money, which is something that, according to everyone that knew Laura, she would never do. So if we knew that Laura was alive when she was writing that note and that there was some sort of duress going on, then it was pretty clear that there was some sort of concerted effort by Grant Hayes to either blackmail her or murder her.
I believe that Grant was enraged in dealing with the child custody upcoming court case.
Grant was anchored in this community because of Laura Ackerson, because of these boys, and getting rid of her would allow him to move off to have his music career.
The custody papers are a critical piece of evidence, but it isn't the only thing investigators discover.
We found a manual for a saw, you know, which of course, you know, was significant because we were dealing with body parts that had been cut up. This saw was a Skill brand reciprocating saw, and through internet searching found out that it was sold at Walmart. So I got up with local Walmart loss prevention people here in Raleigh and said, hey, can you just look and see if you've had this type of saw sold, you know, recently? Loss prevention told me yes, you know, they had one in particular that was suspicious because it was on July 14th at 2:30 a.m.
People get divorced all the time, and they fight about chandeliers, and they fight about the blender and the vacuum cleaner. But when it comes to the discussion and the argument and the litigation surrounding their children, this is a very, very personal and intimate motivation. And sometimes that fighting for the kids takes them out of the courthouse and into the criminal world.
We got video that showed Grant Hayes coming in, going around the store and shopping for that particular saw with several other items, goggles, gloves, trash bags, plastic tarps, and additional saw blades. So that's like a, you know, cleanup kit. He didn't just go in and grab the first saw that he saw. He actually took some time and pondered and walked back and forth up the aisle and, you know, do I want this one? Is this one gonna be able to cut through body parts, or do I need this one? You know, so he put some thought into it, which goes to his premeditation.
It's just chilling to watch him shop for a saw that he'll use to dismember the mother of his children.
We had a meeting, Detective Falk and the prosecutor Boz, about this case, and they said, we saw Grant Hayes on video buying reciprocating saw. I knew it was done by a saw from the initial set of remains that we had, but it appeared my initial assessment in that it was a handsaw was incorrect. And when they came to me with this, I was like, well, if you get me the saw and the saw blades, we can test that saw and compare it to those found on the new set of remains of Miss Ackerman.
It's a groundbreaking test, and to do it, Dr. Ross needs a fresh bone to compare with the marks on Laura's femur.
We usually use pigs, the common pig, as it has normally been used as a proxy for humans. If you receive a long bone, you should test it using a long bone of the pig.
So I went out and bought, you know, the same exact saw and blades and, you know, gave them to Dr. Ross.
It was an electric reciprocating saw and two types of blades. I believe it was a wood and an all-purpose. And then we compared the two types of saws. And what you're looking at are those grooves that those teeth leave on that hard bone. And we were able to compare the distance between the grooves and the teeth using the two types of blades. I wasn't sure what to expect. The first one we tried was the all-purpose blade. So the image on the top are those of Laura Ackerson's cross-section of her femur compared to the marks of the pig's proxy. And when you look here, you can see that there's less distance between each tooth, and then in this one, there's much greater distance between teeth. The all-purpose blade didn't align, and we were like, oh, okay. And then we compared the wood blade. We couldn't believe it that that was it. It was clear as day on the big screen. It was the wood blade that was the one that produced the marks on Miss Ackerman. That was a very exciting moment.
It's the breakthrough evidence investigators have been hoping for.
Dr. Ross's scientific ability is cutting edge. At this point, we knew that Laura had been killed in this apartment. We knew that her body had been dismembered, but we didn't really have a cause of death.
Dr. Ross is one discovery away from ensuring that Laura Ackerson's murderer spends the rest of his life behind bars. In the tragic slaying of Laura Ackerson, one final mystery remains: the exact manner of her death.
Under Laura's skull, there was a small little tick mark, and through microscopic examination, Dr. Ross was able to determine that it was the end of a serrated blade.
A stab wound from a sharp-tipped knife will leave an imprint. You see the nick on the bone. Laura had a stab wound on the anterior surface of one of the cervical vertebrae that was under the chin and around the jawline. The cause of death most likely was due to a stab to the neck.
That was an important piece of evidence to really help us identify what had happened in this case. Then going back to the pictures from the search warrants, we noticed that there were some knives missing in the house.
We never found the knife. It could have been that the suspect disposed of it before we had an opportunity to locate it.
At long last, investigators have what they need to charge Grant and Amanda Hayes for murder.
When they were arrested, I believe their reaction was much the same when we first met them. They were very calm and relaxed and seemed to be a happy couple that was going to get through this difficult time.
Couples that kill together as a team are a rarity, but they do happen. And when they do, there's this tremendous psychological connection and bond between the two of them. If you think about all the people, what's the likelihood of finding a man and a woman who both have the same evil state of mind, that together they think going out and killing somebody is a good thing?
With Dr. Ross's help, investigators have a full picture of what happened to Laura on the night she was killed.
Laura was invited to go to Grant and Amanda's apartment under the ruse to visit the children. There's some conflict or disagreement as far as the child custody. Laura's forced to write the letter under some sort of duress or threat.
We ended up sending that off to the FBI to evaluate and do a handwriting examination on, and they were able to determine that the top half was done by Grant, the bottom was done by Laura.
You know, I believe the initial attack takes place in the dining room, kitchen area of the apartment between Laura and Grant and Amanda. And during the course of that, the evidence tells us that she's stabbed in the neck. Laura is moved to the bathroom. And I really believe that they probably close off the bathroom till the next day.
The dismemberment would have taken a very long time. And we believe that the children were most likely asleep when this occurred.
I think they're probably trying to figure out, what are we doing? What are we gonna do? How are we gonna go about getting rid of her body? They go out and they get the acid, they try that, and it doesn't work. Looking back now, on that day and at that time, you know, he's going down the road with a cooler in the back with her dismembered body parts, and he tells the detective, I don't know what happened to her, I don't know where she is, you know.
Grant Hayes is tried in August 2013, and Amanda goes on trial in January 2014.
When we first approached Grant and Amanda, you know, I vividly remember they looked like newlyweds. During the trial, they each pointed the finger at the other one. It was my thought that they were both just as much involved as the other one.
When you have a couple together and they're committing crimes, it's often difficult to find who's driving the train. Because eventually when they get into court and people know that their lives are now at stake, it's very easy to point the finger at the other. So the motivation to save one's own skin far supersedes the love that the two of them, in some bizarre way, shared.
Dr. Ross is called to the stand and puts forth solid evidence of the brutality of the crime.
I testified as to the small puncture wound at the neck. And in the trial, my job was to show them where and how she was dismembered. And when we were able to explain to them also with a picture which saw blade was used to do this to Miss Ackerman.
Her testimony was key in the trial. The visual image that she was able to show, you know, I think that made a big impact on the jury.
This activity by Grant Hayes, dismembering the body, was so unusual and so extensive and helped show the premeditation deliberation that he had in committing the murder. The last piece of evidence that we put on was this rap song that he had written about killing Laura Ackerman. As we played that song, Grant started to sort of bob and nod his head to the music as it went on, which was a pretty chilling thing to see, that at that stage of trial, he still just couldn't comprehend the vile nature of what he had done. Grant was convicted of first-degree murder and received life in prison without parole. Amanda was convicted of second-degree murder. She got 13 to 16 years.
It was the cooperation of investigators that finally saw justice for Laura.
All Laura wanted was for her boys to be taken care of, and now she's, you know, no longer around for their lives, and it's just heartbreaking. I mean, that was the only thing in life that she cared about, and Grant Hayes took her from them.
The thing that sticks out is the impact it's going to have on the kids, their life. 3-year-old and a 4-year-old, and their mom and dad are both gone. Amanda and Grant had a baby girl who's a newborn. I just hope that they're able to have a good life, a normal life.
I felt that justice had been served, that Miss Ackerman, you know, got her voice back. As a forensic anthropologist, I feel this is something that I have to do to give back to society. I have a unique ability, a unique training in something that not everyone knows how to do. And it is my job to be able to give back in this way if no one else can.